The rain did not wash away the blood. It merely diluted it into a pink slurry that swirled around the boots of the waiting mob. Above, beneath the weeping iron beams of Gallowsgate, Marek Vale stood trembling in a coat that smelled of old copper and worse. The air tasted of ozone and impending violence. His hands were not his own. They belonged to the kingdom's last hope, a desperate, failing institution dressed in rotting wool. In his grip was an axe, rusted and heavy, its edge dull with the neglect of a dying age. Before him, bound in chains that glowed with a sickly, unnatural light, was not a monster, but a woman. The crowd roared for meat, their voices a single, hungry throat. Chancellor Vaust stood to the side, pristine in white silk, holding a signet ring that pulsed in time with the woman's heartbeat. He did not look at her. He looked at Marek. The order hung in the damp air, heavier than the axe. Kill it before it speaks. But Marek saw what the Chancellor hid, and they were illegal. Hours earlier, the stone floor of the dungeons was cold enough to seep through the knees of the dead man's boots. But Marek felt no cold now. Only a hollow, expanding dread that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the axe currently being shoved into his hands. It was heavy, rusted, and smelled of failure. Marek Vale stared at the instrument of death as if it were a foreign object, which, in every sense, it was. He was a public defender from a world where laws protected people, not crushed them. Here, the law was a weapon wielded by those who could afford to hold the handle.
"You're new,"
Chancellor Vaust said, his voice smooth and devoid of any urgency that matched the crisis outside these walls. Vaust stood on a raised dais of polished marble, far above the damp gloom of the holding cell. He did not offer a hand. He only offered an order. The previous executioner lacked nerve. He hesitated when the blood needed flowing. You will not. Marek tightened his grip on the axe handle, feeling the rough iron bite into his palm.
"I am not an executioner. I am Marek Vale. I defend clients. You defended nothing.
Turning away to adjust a cufflink made of crushed gemstones.
The kingdom does not have the luxury of defense. It requires sacrifice. The treasury is empty. The monsters at the gate do not care about your resume. They care about blood, specifically the blood of the thing in cell 4.
Marek blinked. Cell 4? That's where I'm to stand? No. Vaust corrected gently, as if explaining mathematics to a child. You are to stand on Gallowsgate, above the city, where they can watch. The king has signed the order. Vare himself decreed that the river rising was caused by a curse in human form. We have captured it. You will put its head on a spike. Marek looked down at his own hands, then up at Vaust's back. A curse? Or a person? Vaust turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Does it matter? The law says it is a beast. You are the royal executioner. Your job is not to judge the law. Your job is to enforce it. Do you understand your role, Vale?
I understand that if I kill an innocent person, I am no better than the monsters outside.
Marek said,
Then you will die with them.
his tone dropping to a deadly whisper.
But I would advise against such stupidity. The mob above does not want justice.
They want fear, and you are the tool by which we provide it. Take the axe, go to Gallowsgate, execute the prisoner before she can speak.
If she speaks, the contract breaks, and everything we have built collapses. Do you accept?
Marek looked at the rusted blade. He thought of the thousands of clients he had failed to save in his previous life. He thought of the weight of this kingdom, which seemed to be held together by nothing more than lies and fear. He took a breath that felt like it might crack his ribs.
I accept, but I want to see the prisoner first.
Vaust paused. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. Then he smiled, thin and cold. Very well, a final inspection is permitted. But know this, if she speaks before you strike, the blame will be yours alone. Marek nodded once, set of jaw tight. He followed Vaust up the spiral stairs, each step echoing like a countdown. The air grew warmer as they ascended, thick with the scent of incense and panic. When they reached the top, the doors to Gallowsgate groaned open, revealing a sea of faces beneath a gray, weeping sky. Thousands, demanding, hungry, and there in the center of the platform, chained not by iron but by glowing lines of light that stretched from her throat to a ring on Vaust's finger, was Nema. Marek stopped walking. The axe felt heavier than before,
Vaust.
his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd.
What?
They were words, written in the air, binding flesh to contract.
Vaust.
His voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd.
What are those?
Vaust did not look at the woman. He adjusted his white cuffs, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle in silk that cost more than a village's annual grain harvest.
Contracts. Veil. Binding oaths. The law is precise. She broke hers. You enforce it. I see no law.
He stepped forward, the rusted iron of the axe scraping against the stone floor. The sound was sharp, metallic, and utterly out of place in the hushed tension of the chamber.
I see a woman chained by light to your finger. I see a signature that has not been read. I see a debt collected before it is incurred. The debt is clear.
He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the gray light of the windowless room.
She drew power from the River Vare without permit. She stole water from the King's Ward engines. The penalty for theft of royal resources is immediate forfeiture of life and liberty. You say she stole?
He moved closer, ignoring the way Vaust's guards shifted their spears.
I say you are draining a living thing to keep your lights on. Look at her chains. Vaust. They pull from her throat. They do not anchor her feet. That is not justice. That is extraction. It is order.
His smooth facade cracked, just for a second, revealing the frantic panic beneath.
Do you want the capital to fall? Do you want the monsters to breach the walls tonight because we couldn't spare enough mana to keep the shields up? I want the truth to be stated.
He stopped at the edge of the dais, looking down at Nema. Her eyes were closed. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. The chains glowed brighter with every beat of her heart.
If she is a criminal, bring a judge. If she is a prisoner, read her charges. If you kill her without cause, you are not enforcing the law. You are breaking it. There will be no trial.
His voice was low, dangerous.
Time is a luxury we have spent. The Chancellor does not have patience for your public defender theatrics. You have one task. Execute the target. Do not look at her face. Do not listen to her plea. Do not question the contract.
And if I do?
He did not move the axe. He simply held it, letting its weight hang between them.
Then you will be the next one on the block. And I will have a new executioner within the hour. One who understands that fear is the only currency this kingdom has left.
Marek looked at the axe. He looked at Vaust. He looked at Nema. The crowd outside began to chant, a low rumble that vibrated in his bones. Blood, blood.
She is not a beast.
She is a person, and she has a voice. She has no voice where you are going.
He turned fully now, facing him directly. Before we get into the story, do me a quick favor. Like this video, subscribe, and comment what story you want to see next. Now, let's begin. His eyes were cold, dead things. Kill her, before the sun sets, before the wards fail. Or die trying to save a lie. Marek stepped off the dais. The stone was slick with condensation. He walked toward the stairs leading down to Gallows Gate, but his mind was not on the execution. It was on the chains. He could see the text now, shimmering in the air like heat haze. Clause 4, consent of the soul. Clause 7, right of silence.
Vaust.
The crown is legally owned by something beneath the palace.
Vaust froze. His hand tightened on his signet ring. The chains on Nema flared red, painful and bright.
What did you say? I said your kingdom is built on a theft.
He kept walking, the axe swinging at his side.
And I'm going to make it right.
He reached the doors to Gallows Gate. The roar of the crowd hit him like a physical blow. Rain lashed against his face. The platform stretched out before him, slick with blood and water. Nema stood in the center, her head bowed, the chains pulling tight against her neck as Vaust's grip on his ring tightened from above. Marek climbed the steps to the execution block. The wood was old, stained dark by centuries of death. He set the axe down. He looked up at the Chancellor's box, where Vaust watched with the intensity of a hawk circling prey. Then he looked back at Nema.
Can you hear me?
His voice was calm, steady. Nema opened her eyes. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, and yet refused to. Look away. I hear you, she whispered. Her voice was raw, strained by the chains.
They want my name to power their engines, to buy their time. The law does not allow theft without consequence.
He picked up the axe again, but he did not look at her neck. He looked at Vaust. The connection between them was clear now, a glowing tether of light and malice. They will kill me if I speak. Nema, her eyes locked onto his, desperate and bright. But silence is the chain that holds them tighter than iron. Cut the link at the source. Marek tightened his grip on the axe handle. The wood groaned under the pressure of his fingers. He looked up at the Chancellor's box, where Vaust stood rigid, his knuckles white around his signet ring. The glowing chains pulsed in time with the rain, thick veins of contract law stretching across the storm-lit sky.
Vaust.
His voice carried over the wind, clear and sharp.
The defendant is bound by a clause that requires consent. This binding was drafted without it. It is void.
Vaust stepped forward to the railing, his face pale beneath the dim torchlight.
You dare question the crown's prerogative on the gallows. The contract is signed. The king's seal is upon it. It is law. The king has not spoken in years.
He turned back to Nema, keeping his gaze steady on her face.
And a sealed decree does not override the fundamental right of consent. You know this. You wrote it into your own contracts. I wrote them to survive.
Losing his composure for the first time, his voice cracked, thin and shrill against the roar of the crowd. We are all surviving. Now take the axe and do your duty, executioner. The chains were digging into her skin, drawing blood that floated upward, defying gravity to weave itself back into the glowing text above her throat. It was a closed loop of theft. She was being drained to maintain a lie.
I am sworn to uphold the law, and the law does not permit slavery disguised as justice.
He swung the axe, but he did not bring it down on Nema's neck. He spun on his heel, the blade whistling through the air, and launched himself toward the edge of the platform where a narrow stone staircase spiraled up toward the Chancellor's box. Seize him! Vaust screamed. The guards in the box fumbled with their swords, but Marek was already moving, his boots scrambling up the slick steps in 3 desperate bounds. He reached the railing just as a guard lunged at him. Marek sidestepped, using the man's momentum to shove him back into his comrade, and vaulted over the railing onto the narrow ledge connecting the platform to the box. He landed hard on the wet stone, rolling to his feet before Vaust could react. The Chancellor stumbled back, his signet ring still clutched in his hand, the glowing chains trailing from it like a leash. What are you doing? Stop him! Kill him! Marek raised the axe, not at Vaust, but at the air between them. The glowing tether of light pulsed violently, reacting to his presence. He could feel the weight of the oath in the metal, a heavy, corrupt pressure that made his teeth ache. You want an execution? He pointed the blade tip at Vaust's chest. Then look at your work, Chancellor. Look at what you have built on stolen breath. His eyes widened as he saw the chains flickering, weakening as Marek's will clashed with their corrupted foundation. The text shimmered, fragments of illegality breaking off like snowflakes.
You cannot break a royal contract.
Vaust cried out.
It is binding. It is absolute. It is a lie, and lies are the only thing that dies easy.
He turned his head, addressing the crowd below who were beginning to murmur in confusion and awe. Their chants had died down, replaced by a stunned silence as they watched their executioner stand on the Chancellor's ledge, axe raised, not in murder, but in judgment. The defendant is Nema of the 9th Flood, Marek announced. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of a verdict. She did not steal from the king. She was stolen by him. The contract under which she stands is illegal from its inception. It violates the first principle of blood. No soul may be bound without consent. Silence him. He dropped his signet ring, clutching at Marek's tunic with trembling hands. You are a traitor. You are nothing but a butcher. Marek caught Vaust's wrists in one hand, holding them fast. With the other, he drove the edge of the axe blade into the stone beside Vaust's head, pinning the Chancellor's sleeve to the floor.
I am the lawbreaker king's last act, and I have come to balance the ledger.
He looked up at the sky, where the clouds were swirling into a vortex directly above the palace spire. The rain fell harder, washing away the blood on the platform, but the glow from Nema's chains remained faint but persistent.
Look at the king. Look at what your survival has cost us all.
Vaust turned his head, looking toward the distant silhouette of the palace, a ghost in the machine of his own making.
The wards are failing.
The words fell out of him like stones into a well.
If you break this chain, the power goes.
Marek tightened his grip on Vaust's wrists, feeling the Chancellor tremble beneath his touch. The weight of the signet ring burned against Marek's palm, a hot, jagged pressure that smelled of ozone and old blood. He did not look at the king's distant silhouette. He looked only at the man who had traded humanity for survival.
You built your power on a foundation of bones,
His voice was low, cutting through the storm.
and now you ask me to let it stand. To let them die in the dark so you can keep your light.
Vaust spat blood onto the wet stone. You do not understand. The wards hold back more than just water. They hold back him. If the flow stops, the thing beneath the palace wakes, and there will be no law left to break. Marek's eyes narrowed. He saw the flicker of fear in Vaust's gaze, not for himself, but for the truth he had buried. The Chancellor was not protecting the people. He was protecting his own guilt. The thing beneath the palace, Marek repeated. The words tasted like ash. Is that what the king signed away? The right to live? He signed away mercy. Vaust screamed, his composure shattering completely. He thrashed against Marek's hold, but Marek did not budge. He signed away the capacity to forgive. We are not saving lives, Vale. We are delaying death by one day at a time. One contract. One soul. Do you think you can save them all with an axe? You are a butcher, nothing more. Marek leaned in close. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, but he did not blink. Then let me butcher the lie. Because a lie kills faster than any blade. He released one of Vaust's wrists and slammed his hand against the signet ring. A spark of blue light erupted from the metal, searing Marek's skin. He ignored the pain. Instead, he focused on the connection, the glowing tether that stretched across the storm, binding Nima's soul to the palace's heart. It was thick, suffocating, and rotting from within.
You claim the crown owns this, but I am the last executioner, and I see the debt.
He raised the axe high. The crowd below had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Thousands of eyes were fixed on the platform, on the Chancellor's box, on the two men standing on the precipice of history.
Vaust.
If I cut this chain, what happens to you?
Vaust's face went gray. He stared at the axe blade, gleaming with rain and malice. You cannot know. No one knows. Then let us find out together. Marek brought the axe down, but he did not strike Vaust. He struck the air between them, severing the glowing tether where it connected to the ring. The sound was like a thunderclap trapped in a bottle. A shockwave rippled outward, knocking guards off their feet and sending rain droplets hanging suspended in the air for a heartbeat. The signet ring cracked. Veins of light spread across its surface, then shattered into dust. Vaust screamed, clutching his hand as if it had been burned. No, stop, you fool. You've killed us all. Marek stepped back, letting the axe fall to his side. The tether snapped. The red glow that had pulsed from Nima's throat died instantly. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, the chains falling away from her neck like dead snakes. But the silence that followed was worse than any scream. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute.
Look.
Pointing down at the city. The lights of the capital began to flicker, one by one. Then in clusters, the ward engines that powered the protective dome over the palace sputtered and died. The sky above them darkened, not with clouds, but with the encroaching shadow of something vast and ancient rising from the depths below. Vaust fell to his knees, staring at his empty hand. The price, he whispered.
We haven't paid the price. The price was paid long ago.
He looked out over the sea of faces below. They were not cheering. They were staring up in terror, their hands covering their mouths, their eyes wide with a realization that hit harder than any blade. He had freed Nima, but he had also awakened the monster they had been feeding for years. The ground beneath the platform shuddered. A deep, resonant groan echoed from below, shaking the stone to its core. The rain turned cold, biting through Marek's clothes as the first tendrils of black water began to seep over the edge of the gallows. Vaust looked up at Marek, his eyes filled with a terrible clarity.
You thought you were judging the law, but you just opened the door.
Marek did not answer. He watched the first drop of black water hit the stone beside him, sizzling like acid. Then another, and another. The execution was over. The trial had begun. Rain hammered against the rusted iron of the gallows platform, turning the wood slick and treacherous beneath Marek Vale's boots. The crowd below was a roiling sea of gray wool and wet skin, their faces upturned in a mixture of hunger and bloodlust. Nima stood bound to the central post, her wrists raw from ropes that had long since given way to heavy chains bearing the Chancellor's seal. She looked not at the axe in Marek's hands, but at the sky, as if waiting for a rainstorm worse than the one falling now. Chancellor Vaust stepped forward from the shadow of the execution booth, his velvet coat immaculate despite the weather. He smiled, a thin, cruel stretching of lips that didn't reach his eyes.
An execution is not justice because a crowd enjoys it.
His voice steady over the drumming rain.
Show me the law, Chancellor.
Vaust laughed, a dry sound like stones grinding together. You speak in riddles to a man who holds the key to your survival, executioner. Do you think your rusted axe has weight here? No executioner can touch a royal minister. I am the law. My word is the structure upon which this kingdom stands. You are merely the broom that sweeps away the refuse. Marek did not lower the axe,
Refuse does not wear signet rings. Careful.
his smile widening.
You stand on my platform. You breathe my air. You exist by my grace. Cut her head, or I will have your soul added to the ledger for a crime you haven't committed yet.
The heavy thud of armored boots echoed from the gatehouse above. The crowd parted as Seraphine Rowe emerged, flanked by 6 crown magistrates in their crimson-draped cloaks. She moved with practiced efficiency, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword, her eyes scanning the platform with calculated detachment.
Stand down, executioner.
Her voice cutting through the rain.
Order must be preserved.
Marek turned his head slightly toward her. The order is broken, Captain. Look at her chains. Seraphine Rowe glanced at Nema. The glowing golden links of the contract chains pulsed with a sickly light, running from Nema's throat up into the air, vanishing toward Vaust's chest. Seraphine frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion.
They are standard royal seals. What do they mean? They mean nothing to you because you refuse to see them. Read the contract aloud.
Seraphine Rowe hesitated.
I am not a scribe, Vale. I enforce law. I do not interpret it.
Then read it as it is written. Not as you wish it to be. Read it, Seraphine. She stepped closer to the post, her expression tight with annoyance and unease. She pulled a scroll from her belt, unfurling the parchment with trembling fingers. Article 4, she began, reading stiffly. The bearer agrees to... The text, it's shifting. Keep reading, Marek commanded. The price is paid in blood of the unworthy, Seraphine read, her voice faltering as the ink on the page writhed like live worms. The vessel must be hollowed to sustain the ward engines. The words on the scroll changed before their eyes, the gold ink turning black and jagged. Prisoners from the lower districts are bound by this oath to keep the river spirit dormant. Vaust's laughter cut off abruptly. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. That scroll is forged. Seize her. Marek raised his axe, the blade catching the dull light of the storm. Prove it, he said. Invoke the challenge condition. Prove a price was taken without lawful exchange. You dare? Vaust snarled. He pulled his own signet ring from his finger, and black smoke erupted from it, coalescing into tendrils that lashed toward Marek. The air grew heavy with the scent of copper and decay. You are nothing but a tool. Seraphine Rowe drew her sword, stepping between Vaust's magic and Marek. Stand back, Chancellor. This is under Crown jurisdiction. Jurisdiction? Vaust screamed. The tendrils of black smoke wrapped around Seraphine's blade, burning the metal with cold fire. I am the jurisdiction. Marek stepped forward, ignoring the sting of the magic whipping against his coat. He looked at Nema, then back to Vaust. The law is clear. No blood may be taken without a price. Vaust lunged, not at Marek, but at Seraphine. his hand outstretched to drain her life force through the contract chain visible in the air. Die with your useless laws? Marek swung. The rusted iron bit deep, severing not just flesh but the invisible threads that bound Vaust to the sky. The Chancellor's head tumbled from his shoulders, rolling across the wet planks until it struck Nima's chain with a dull, metallic clatter. Black blood erupted from the neck stump, spraying into the rain in thick, viscous arcs. It did not pool on the wood. Instead, the crimson fluid defied gravity, rising in spiraling ribbons that solidified into jagged black letters hanging in the air above the gallows. Seraphine Rowe staggered back, her sword arm trembling as the smoke tendrils dissolved into mist. She stared at the floating text, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. "What have you done?" she breathed. Marek stepped over Vaust's body, his boots squelching in the gore. He looked up at the swirling words, which now formed a sentence that burned with cold fire.
I enforced the contract.
His voice was flat, devoid of triumph or regret.
The Chancellor violated the primary clause. He took blood without paying the price.
Nima strained against her restraints, the glowing chains around her neck flaring with blinding intensity. The light pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that matched the thrumming of the rain. "The contract is broken," she said, her voice rough from disuse but sharp with sudden power.
He lied. He always lies.
Though she lowered her sword, pointing it not at Marek, but at the floating text. The letters were rearranging themselves, forming new clauses, new laws that seared into the atmosphere like brands on hot iron. But you didn't just break his contract, you rewrote the foundation of the state. Marek turned to face her, rainwater streaming down his face, mixing with the spray of Vaust's blood. A law is only as strong as its enforcement. Vaust thought he could exempt himself because he wore the crown's seal. He forgot that the seal serves the kingdom, not the man. Seraphine Rowe took a step closer, her boots splashing in the growing puddle of black gore. "The crowd is silent," she observed. "They are waiting for an explanation. If you do not give one, they will burn what is left. Look at it. Does it require my voice?" Nema pulled at her chains, the metal groaning under the pressure of her own magic. "It requires my answer," she snapped. Her eyes locked onto Vaust's headless body. "You did not free me, executioner. You merely made my anger legal." Seraphine Rowe frowned, her pragmatic mind racing to catch up with the metaphysical shift.
Legal how? The river is still rising. The ward engines are still feeding on the lower districts. Vaust is dead, but the mechanism remains. The mechanism is now subject to challenge.
He raised his axe, not to strike again, but to point at the glowing chains connected to Nema's throat.
"Every debt he stole is now a lien against the crown, and I am the only one with the authority to collect."
A harsh, barking sound that echoed off the wet stones.
You think you can pay them? You have nothing but an axe and a dead chancellor's title. I have the law.
He stepped closer to Nema, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her chains. The air around her crackled with static, smelling of ozone and old rain. "And I have the right to audit every account Vaust kept in blood." Seraphine Rowe holstered her sword, her face pale beneath the rain. "If you do this, Vale, there is no going back. The nobility will not forgive a challenge to their source of power. They will call you a traitor." Marek looked at the crowd below. The silence had broken, replaced by a low, rising murmur of awe and fear. Thousands of faces stared up at the platform, their eyes fixed on the black letters hanging in the storm.
Let them. They already hate me. This way, I give them something to fear that isn't just a name.
Nema's chains began to glow brighter, the light shifting from gold to a violent, blood-red crimson. "The river is waking up," she whispered. "It senses the break in the seal. It knows you're there." Marek kept his gaze on Nema. "Then let it come. I am not here to save the kingdom from the water. I am here to save it from itself." Seraphine Rowe reached out, gripping Marek's arm before he could move toward Nema. Her fingers were cold, her grip desperate. "Wait. Think about the consequences. If you unravel his contracts, you unravel the treaties with the neighboring houses. You unravel the protection of the capital. You will drown us all to save a few." Marek pulled his arm free, his eyes hard as flint. "We are already drowning, Captain." Vaust just slowed the pace. I am speeding it up so we can learn to swim. He turned back to Nema, raising his axe one final time, not in execution, but in declaration. The black letters above them pulsed, sinking with the rising tide of the river below.
Nema, are you ready to pay?
Marek lowered the axe, the rusted blade dripping black gore onto the wet wood. He looked at Nema, then up at the swirling letters of his new law. The rain hammered against the platform, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to sync with the throbbing veins in Nema's neck. The chains binding her did not snap yet. They pulsed, growing tighter as the river below began to scream against its banks. Seraphine Rowe stepped forward, her boots splashing through the pooling blood. She kept her sword drawn, but she held it low, point down. "You've triggered a cascade," she said, her voice cutting through the roar of the wind. "Vaust's death severs the contract, yes, but the ward engines are still running on autopilot. They're pulling from the river because the contract is broken, not because Nema is willing." Marek turned his head slowly to look at her. His eyes were dark, hollowed out by the weight of the newly inscribed law hanging above them. "The law does not care for machinery," he said. "It cares for exchange. Vaust took blood without price. That debt is now owed. Who holds the ledger?" Seraphine Rowe shook her head, shaking rain from her lashes. "I don't know. The Crown magistrates have no records of this. Vaust kept his accounts in flesh, not ink." She gestured toward the city walls below, where the water was already lapping at the first level of the stone foundations. "If you release her now, the flood won't stop. It will accelerate. You're trading a slow death by drowning for a fast one by chaos." Nema let out a sharp, bitter laugh. The chains around her wrists rattled, the metal hot to the touch. She looked at Marek, her eyes glowing with the same violet light that now pulsed in the black letters above. "You think you are doing me a favor?" she shouted over the rising tide. "He held me because he needed a sink for the waste. Without him, I am just another valve in a machine that wants to burst." Marek raised his axe again, not toward Nema, but toward the sky. The black letters shifted, rearranging themselves into a new shape. Proof of debt present.
Then, we settle it. The law demands proof. I have provided the executioner's blade. The blood is spilled. The contract is void.
He pointed the axe at Nema's throat, but the debt remains. "You are bound to the river. Is that not a price?" "It is a cage," Nema spat. She strained against the chains, her muscles corded and trembling. "And you are holding the key, but you refuse to turn it." Seraphine Rowe lowered her sword completely, letting it hang by her side. She looked from Marek to Nema, then down at the street below. The crowd had gone utterly silent. Thousands of faces were upturned, wet and pale, watching the three figures on the gallows.
They're waiting. They want to know if you're going to drown them all.
Marek looked down at the sea of faces. He felt the gaze of thousands pressing against his skin, heavier than the rain, heavier than the axe in his hand. He remembered Earth. He remembered the courtrooms, the endless paperwork, the way people would stare at him with a mix of hope and terror, waiting for him to speak truth into existence.
Let them watch.
He turned back to Nema.
Tell me what you owe, spirit.
Nema froze. The violet light in her eyes flickered.
I do not owe. I was stolen. Theft is not debt. Then prove it.
His voice was flat, devoid of emotion.
Prove the exchange was illegal. Invoke the audit.
Seraphine Rowe gasped. "You can't just ask that. The system doesn't work like that. You need a warrant, a magistrate's seal." Marek glanced at her, his expression unchanging. "I am the last executioner. My axe is the warrant. My blood is the seal." He looked back at Nema. "Speak. What was taken?" Nema closed her eyes. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "My voice," she said. He took my voice to mute the river's scream. He bound it to his signet ring. She looked up, her gaze fierce. "If you cut these chains, I will speak. And if I speak, the river will listen, but it will not stop. It will demand its own back." Seraphine Rowe stepped between Marek and Nema again. Marek moved his axe, gently pushing Seraphine aside with the flat of the blade. "It is restitution," he said. Vaust stole from the world to keep his kingdom dry. Now the world collects. He looked at Nema.
Cut the chains, executioner. Or do you fear your own power? I do not fear anything.
He stepped forward, raising the axe high above his head. The rain sizzled against the rusted iron. I have only duties. Seraphine Rowe reached out, grabbing Marek's wrist. Her grip was tight, desperate. If you do this, there is no going back. The nobles will come for you. The Seraphine Rowe tightened her grip, her knuckles white against the rain-slicked wood of the gallows platform. You are playing with fire, she said, her voice low and urgent. Vaust is dead, but his network remains. The wardens, the merchants, the houses, they will not wait for an audit. They will strike first. Marek did not pull away. He looked at Seraphine, then past her, toward the Chancellor's palace that loomed in the distance, its spires dark against the bruised sky.
Let them try. They rely on fear of the law. I have become the law.
Nema strained against the chains, the metal groaning under the pressure of the river's rising power. He is right, she shouted over the wind. You hesitate because you still think like a servant. Think like an executor. The debt is due. Collect it. Seraphine Rowe released Marek's wrist and stepped back, drawing her sword again. She pointed the blade at Nema, then turned it toward Marek.
If you release her,
You make yourself the target of every noble house in Vare. Do you have the strength to hold that line? I do not need strength.
He lifted the axe. The rusted blade caught the lightning's flash, glowing with a sickly green light. I have authority. He swung. The axe did not cut flesh. It cut the air, a clean arc of force that severed the invisible tether between Nema's throat and the sky. The chains fell away, clattering to the wet wood. Nema gasped, her body going limp for a moment before she straightened, her eyes blazing with violet fire. The river screamed. It was not a sound heard by ears but felt in the bones. A tidal wave of pressure slammed into the platform, knocking Seraphine Rowe to one knee. Marek stood firm, his boots rooted to the stones, as water erupted from the riverbed, rising in a spiral column that reached toward the black letters in the sky. Nema raised her hands, her voice raw and powerful. I take back what is mine. She roared. The words hung in the air, visible as shimmering runes of light. The river answers to no master but itself. The water column collapsed inward, then exploded outward, flooding the lower districts of the city. Screams echoed from below, distant but terrified. Seraphine Rowe looked up, her face pale. You've broken the dam. Marek lowered his axe. The black letters in the sky shifted, forming a new line. Debt settled. New obligations pending. He looked at Seraphine. The first debt is paid, he said, but the system does not stop. It only moves to the next entry. Seraphine Rowe sheathed her sword, her hands shaking. What comes next? Marek looked at his hands, feeling the cold weight of the law settling into his bones. Justice, he said, and then accountability. Nema stepped forward, water dripping from her hair. She looked at Marek, her expression unreadable. You think you have freed me, she said, but you have only made my anger legal. And now, I will use it to burn everything Vaust built. Marek nodded. Then let us burn it together. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from the platform, but the air remained thick with the smell of ozone and impending chaos. Below, the city was drowning, and above, the law hung like a guillotine blade, waiting for the next name. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Seraphine Rowe lowered her sword, her arm trembling not from fatigue, but from the sheer weight of what had just transpired. She looked at Marek, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and dread. Marek did not look at her. He stared at the Chancellor's signet ring, now lying on the wet wood between them, cracked open and dripping black fluid.
No, I have enforced a contract. There is a difference.
Nema stepped closer, the water around her feet rising in rhythmic pulses. She picked up the ring, examining it with a predator's gaze. Vaust thought he could hoard the river, she said, her voice dripping with venom. He thought he could own the world's grief. She crushed the ring in her fist, and the metal shattered into dust. But water always finds its level. Seraphine Rowe looked from Naima to Marek, then down at the crowd. The thousands of citizens were no longer demanding blood. They were watching in terrified silence. Some were praying, some were weeping. All of them were waiting for a sign that this was over.
They are afraid. Let them be afraid.
He turned to face her, his expression devoid of pity.
Fear is the first step toward respect, and respect is the only thing that keeps order when the law fails.
Naima laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. You speak like a bureaucrat, executioner, but you act like a god. Do not mistake my liberation for your victory. I am free, yes, but the river is angry, and it does not care who holds the axe. Seraphine Rowe holstered her sword, her face pale. The wardens will be here by dawn, she said. They will come with troops, with warrants, with everything they have left. She looked at Marek, her gaze hardening. You need to decide if you are still their executioner or something else entirely. Marek picked up the axe, the weight of it familiar and cold. He looked at the black letters in the sky, which were slowly fading into the storm clouds. I am no one's tool, he said. Not anymore. Naima turned away, walking toward the edge of the platform. Below, the water was rising fast, swallowing the lower gates. Then come with me, she said without looking back. The palace is full of secrets and debts. Lots of debts. Seraphine Rowe grabbed Marek's arm, her grip tight. Don't listen to her, she pleaded. She will use you. You will destroy us all. Marek pulled his arm free gently. Or, he said, I might just balance the books. He walked past Seraphine, past Naima, toward the stairs that led down into the flooding city. The rain fell harder now, washing away the blood of the Chancellor, but not the stain on his soul. He did not look back. There was no going back. Rain hammered against the rusted iron railings of Gallows Gate, turning the wooden platform into a slick, treacherous stage. Thousands of voices roared from the mud below, a wall of sound that vibrated through the soles of Marek Vale's boots. He stood at the edge, the dead executioner's coat heavy and damp on his shoulders, gripping the handle of an axe that felt lighter than it should have been. The crowd demanded blood, their eyes fixed on the chain-link cage where Naima of the Ninth Flood sat, water dripping from her hair like tears she refused to shed. Naima lifted her head, her gaze piercing through the rain and the mob to lock onto Marek's. She did not beg. She waited. The river behind her, swollen and angry, held its breath just inches from the city. Walls, a silent threat suspended in time? It would breach the gates if she gave the word, drowning the very people who had enslaved her lineage for centuries. But she wanted an answer first. Why should she spare those who profited from her captivity? Marek stepped forward, the axe resting against his hip, and addressed the silence between the roaring crowd. An execution is not justice because a crowd enjoys it, he said, his voice carrying over the din without shouting. Show me the law, Chancellor. Chancellor Vaust stood on the raised dais beside him, his velvet robes untouched by the rain, his face a mask of calculated indifference. He signaled to the guards, who tightened their grip on Naima's chains.
The law is that she dies.
His tone bored.
She caused the river to rise. She is the fault.
Marek looked past him, tracing the faint, glowing golden lines that stretched from Naima's throat to the signet ring on Vaust's finger. They were contract chains, binding her life force to the palace's ward engines. The public execution was a lie, a distraction to hide an illegal extraction oath while the Chancellor drained the river. Dry.
You are lying.
Turning back to Vaust.
The wards are failing because you are draining her, not because she is attacking.
Vaust's smile tightened. Do not question the evidence. Strike the blow, executioner, or be replaced by one who will. Seraphine Rowe stepped out from the shadows of the gallows support beams, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The captain of the Crown Magistrates looked pale, her eyes darting between the furious mob and the glowing chains only Marek could see. Marek, she said, keeping her voice low so only he could hear.
If you refuse, they will kill us both, and then they will drain her anyway. No.
Looking at Seraphine.
If I strike, I validate the contract. If I don't, I break it. But breaking it requires proof, not just defiance.
He turned to Nema. Why are you stopping the river? Nema's voice was rough, like stones grinding together.
To see if you are worth saving. You stand in their coat, holding their axe. Are you one of them, or are you just another blade? I am neither. I am a man who knows that a contract built on lies is voidable. But I need your help to prove it.
Nema tilted her head.
How do you propose to stop the 7 houses? They control the courts, the food stores, and the city watch. You have no army. I have the truth, and I have the authority of the law of blood. But I need a temporary oath, a binding agreement between me and the river.
Seraphine shook her head violently.
This is madness. You're negotiating with a force of nature? We don't have time for philosophy. We have time to die.
He turned back to Nema.
I will expose every contract that enslaved the riverbound, every illegal debt, every forced treaty, every crown stolen by blood. I will unravel the system that let Vaust do this.
Nema studied him for a long moment, the water around her churning gently.
And if you fail, if the 7 houses crush you before you can speak, then the river drowns the capital. But if I succeed, the flood stops, and the truth comes out. Do we have an accord?
Nema closed her eyes. I grant you 19 days. The golden chains around Nema's throat flickered and turned silver, then faded. The river behind them groaned, holding its position. A system of invisible text overlaid Marek's vision. Kingdom stability, 11%, 14%, capital breach forecast. 19 days event chain initiated, the flood under the throne. Seraphine exhaled sharply.
19 days? That's it? That's our window to save the city. It is what I promised.
Seraphine looked at him, her expression hardening.
You promised a river justice against 7 houses.
Marek adjusted his grip on the axe, looking out at the terrified, hopeful faces in the crowd below. No, he answered. I promised a river evidence. Chancellor Vaust clapped his hands once, the sound sharp and final. Enough talk. The sentence must be carried out. Executioner. Or shall I call for the royal guard to relieve you of your position? And your life? Marek looked at Vaust's signet ring, then at the chains connecting it to Nema. Vaust's fingers twitched around the signet ring, the gold band tightening as his knuckles whitened. Do not test my patience, Vale, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that cut through the rain's roar.
The girl is a weapon of mass destruction. Her very existence is an act of war against the crown. You know this. Your orders were clear. They were illegal orders based on false premises.
Keeping his face blank despite the adrenaline thrumming in his veins, he took a step toward the dais, forcing Vaust to lean back slightly on the raised platform. The law requires proof of guilt before execution. The current evidence is fabricated. Therefore, the order is void. Proof? Vaust spat the word like it was poison. The river rises. The city floods. That is all the proof anyone needs. You are a bureaucrat playing judge and jury on a battlefield. Strike her down, or I will have your head mounted beside hers to show the people what happens to traitors. Seraphine moved swiftly, placing herself between Vaust's guards and Marek. The Chancellor speaks for the crown, she said, her hand firm on her sword hilt, though her eyes warned Marek of the trap closing in.
If you refuse, you are no longer a civil servant. You are an enemy of the state. Do not make me choose between my oath and my friend. You made your choice when you handed me that axe.
Not looking away from Vaust.
Because I needed a scapegoat who could look the people in the eye.
Vaust admitted, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the panic beneath. A commoner with no allegiance to the houses. Someone disposable. If this fails, you die for it. If it succeeds, we drain her slowly over months to keep the ward stable without drawing attention. It is the only way, slowly. Nema's voice rose above the wind, sharp and cold. You call draining my life force a stability? You call stealing the breath of my ancestors a solution? I am not your battery. I am the dam that keeps your greed from drowning us all. Marek felt the weight of the axe in his hand shift, the rusted iron humming with a low frequency only he could hear. Vaust's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of pure malice. Silence, executioner. You speak beyond your station. I speak within my new authority, Marek countered. He turned to the crowd, raising the axe high so the rain slicked its blade. People of Ver, The Chancellor lies. Nema is not the cause of the flood. She is the plug holding back a greater disaster. Vaust has enslaved her lineage to power your homes, your lights, your lives. And now he seeks to kill her to hide his theft. Gasps rippled through the front rows of the mob. The cheering stopped, replaced by a confused murmur that spread outward like a wave. Vaust slammed his hand on the dais railing. Guards, seize him. Now! Seraphine's sword flashed from its scabbard, the steel ringing out as she parried the first strike from a guard lunging at Marek. Hold them off! She shouted, shoving the soldier back into two others. Marek, finish it! Finish what? Vaust shrieked, fumbling for his own dagger as the crowd's attention turned fully to the dais. He is mad. Kill him. The water around the platform began to swirl, forming a vortex that pulled at the mud and the blood already staining the wood. I will drown this city if you do not release me from this contract right now. Marek looked at Vaust, then at the glowing chain connecting the Chancellor's ring to Nema's throat. He realized then that the law did not care about justice, it cared about balance, and Vaust had tipped the scale too far.
Show me the law.
His voice calm despite the chaos erupting around him.
You want proof? Here is your proof.
He swung the axe. It was not aimed at Nema. It was aimed at the space between Vaust and Nema, severing the invisible tether of authority that bound the Chancellor's command to the executioner's duty. The blade passed through the air, and a shock wave of golden light erupted from the point of impact, striking Vaust in the chest. Vaust gasped, clutching his throat as he fell backward off the dais. He hit the platform hard, his signet ring skittering across the wet wood. The chain glowing from Nema's throat flickered violently, then snapped, dissolving into mist before it could reconnect to the ring. No. Vaust coughed, blood bubbling between his lips as he scrambled backward on his elbows. What have you done? You've broken the first oath. You're ruined. Marek stood over him, the axe dripping with rain and something darker that was not quite blood. I broke your lie, he said. Now the contract is void. Nema of the Ninth Flood is free. The crowd erupted into a roar that shook the Gaul. The roar of the crowd did not fade, it fractured. The unified demand for blood splintered into a cacophony of panic, confusion, and sudden violent opportunism. Seraphine's blade sang again, a bright arc of steel that parted the first wave of guards lunging toward the dais. She kicked one man in the knee, hearing the sickening crack of bone through the din, and drove her shoulder into another's chest to create breathing room for Marek. Get off the platform! Seraphine yelled over the rising scream of the mob. Now, before they drag you down? Marek did not move his feet. He kept his weight centered on the balls of his toes, the axe resting low against his hip. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he refused to blink. Below them, the sea of faces had shifted. The demand for Nema's head had evaporated, replaced by a hungry, uncertain glint. They were no longer looking at a victim. They were looking at a breach in the wall they had been taught never to question. Chancellor Vaust scrambled backward, his fine silk robe soaking up the mud and rainwater of Gallowsgate. He clawed at his throat, where a red line pulsed visibly under his skin. The ghost of the severance Marek had struck. You have doomed us all. The wards fail. The rivers rise. You think you are a hero? You are an arsonist in a powder keg. Seraphine grabbed Marek's arm, her fingers digging into the wet wool of his coat. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with the guards and everything to do with what came next. If you break that link, who pays for the power grid? Who keeps the floodgates open? You just handed a loaded gun to 7 houses who want your head on a pike. Marek looked down at Vaust, then past him to where Nema stood free in her cage, the water around her stilling to an eerie calm. It is paid by truth. And the truth is that Vaust lied to you. He pointed the axe blade toward the Chancellor, who was now being pulled back by his remaining loyalists, dragging himself into the shadows of the palace colonnade. A stone flew from the crowd, striking the wooden post near Marek's head with a splintering crack. Then another. The fear in their eyes was turning to anger, not at Nema, but at the system that had let her be chained while they drowned. A voice roared from the front row, a man in a merchant's livery, his face twisted by rain and rage. You cut the chain, but you did not fill the hole. The lights go out tonight. The wells turn dry. What do we have now, executioner? Seraphine stepped between Marek and the stone throwers, her sword held low, ready to parry anything that came close. He gave you 19 days. That is all he owes you right now. The merchant laughed, a harsh, barking sound. 19 days until we starve? Until the water reaches our second stories? You call that mercy? Marek lowered the axe slightly, his gaze locking with the merchant's. I call it time. Time to find the other contracts. Time to find the other plugs. Vaust used Nima because she was easy to chain, but he is not the first. He will not be the last. He turned back to Seraphine, ignoring the escalating violence of the crowd pressing against the guards' lines. Seraphine asked, her eyes darting to the palace doors where more guards were gathering.
You cannot fight an army with a rusted axe and a speech. I do not need to fight an army. I need to expose a ledger.
He stepped toward the edge of the platform, looking out at the thousands of faces. The rain hammered against his skin, cold and relentless. He felt the law of blood humming in his veins, a low vibration that connected him to every debt, every oath, every hidden truth bound in ink and blood. Across the city, he could feel the weight of the contracts around him like physical chains. Marek's voice cut through the noise, amplified by the strange resonance of his new authority. Chancellor Vaust is not your protector. He is your thief. He stole your water. He stole your stability. And he did it because you were told to trust the seal on his ring. He held up his hand, palm open. I have broken the seal. Now I will show you the debt. Nima's head tilted, the water around her cage shifting with a heavy, wet slither. Her eyes were not yellow anymore. They were clear, deep, and terrifyingly lucid. Why? She asked. Her voice was not loud, but it carried over the wind, settling into the silence that had suddenly seized the plaza. The guards at the edge of the platform froze, their swords lowering an inch. I asked why, Nema continued, looking past the crowd to Marek. I am a river. I do not care for your politics. I do not care for your 7 houses or your chancellor's gold. I only care for flow. If you stop me, the city drowns. You cut the chain that held my anger back. Do you know what sits beneath it? Marek stepped closer to the cage bars, ignoring Seraphine's sharp intake of breath. He placed a hand on the cold iron.
You are the plug, not the cause. Correct?
A drop of water rose from the pool below her cage, hovering in midair before splashing against her cheek. For centuries, your ancestors built dams of blood and stone. You bound me to feed your ward engines. You kept the capital dry by keeping me captive. Now you have broken the primary lock. The pressure has nowhere to go but down. Seraphine stepped up beside Marek, her hand resting on her hilt. She looked at the sky, where the clouds were bruising purple, then back at Nema.
What happens when the plug fails?
Her voice tight with dread.
The 9th flood begins. Not tomorrow. Not in a month. The foundation of this palace is built on the old riverbed. Vaust drained my blood to power his lights. Now that I am free, I will fill the hollows. Your city is not sinking because of rain, Captain. It is sinking because it is empty.
Marek felt the law of blood thrum against his ribs, a cold, rhythmic pulse. He looked at Nema, really looked at her, and saw the truth she had offered. She was not an enemy to be defeated. She was a debt to be accounted for.
How do we stop it? Stop it?
Nema laughed, a sound like boulders grinding together.
You cannot stop a mountain from falling. You can only move the people out of its path. I will halt my ascent. I will wait, but only for an answer.
What answer?
Her patience snapping.
You threaten us with death and ask for a debate? Name your terms or we drag you back to that cage ourselves.
Nema's eyes narrowed. The water around the platform began to boil. You do not negotiate with water, Captain of Magistrates. You negotiate with the one who holds the pen? She looked at Marek. Chancellor Vaust signed the contracts that bound me? He lied to the crown about my nature to secure his power. But there are others. There are 7 other seals spread across the city, binding the tributaries that feed me. If I rise, they will break first. The wards will fail. The 7 houses will claim it is natural disaster to seize your assets. They will let you drown to buy their loyalty. Marek looked at Seraphine. She was staring at him, waiting for a command, but he had none to give yet. He had only the axe in his hand and the law in his head.
So we find the other seals, we break them all before you rise. And if I refuse,
Nima asked.
then you drown us all, and who will hold the next plug? There is no guarantee the next prisoner will be as reasonable as you.
The crowd was silent now, watching the exchange with bated breath. The threat of immediate death had passed, replaced by the colder terror of systemic collapse. Nima studied Marek for a long moment, her gaze stripping away his rank, his title, his fear. "You are new to this," she said finally. "Your mind is clean." "That is dangerous. It is efficient," Marek corrected. "I do not carry the weight of their history. I only see the broken contracts. You want justice? I will give you evidence. Every contract that enslaved your people, every treaty that justified your captivity, every deed that sold the riverbed to the nobility. I will bring them all to light." Nima smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "A public trial," she mused.
The 7 houses have the courts. They have the judges. They will bury you in procedure before you speak your first word. Then we make a new court.
He turned to Seraphine.
Captain, get me into the archives. The royal archives. Vaust's private seal is there. I need to see the original charters.
Seraphine paled.
The royal archives are under House Vane's protection. It is a fortress. We cannot enter it openly. We do not go openly.
He looked back at Nima.
Nima of the 9th flood. I offer you this, 19 days. Before the foundations give way, before the water rises above the first tier, I will have exposed every illegal contract binding your kin. If I fail, you take the city. If I succeed, we renegotiate the terms of your captivity. Not as slaves, as partners.
Nima considered this, the water around her cage stilling to a rain slicked the stone steps of the Hall of Unappealed Judgments, turning them into a treacherous slide toward the past. Marek Vale pulled the heavy iron door open, the hinges screaming in protest against years of neglect. Seraphine Rowe stepped inside first, her magisterial coat dripping onto the dusty floor, while Marek followed, his new executioner's axe strapped to his back, its weight a constant reminder of the title he had stolen. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of old parchment and something sharper, fear, preserved in ink. Thousands of petitions lined the walls, stacked from floor to ceiling in chaotic towers of paper. Each stack hummed with a low, mournful vibration, the sound of voices silenced by bureaucratic indifference. Marek ran a gloved hand along the nearest shelf. The papers felt cold, dead to the touch but alive with resentment.
"We're not supposed to be here."
Her voice echoing in the vast, empty space.
"This archive was sealed after the purge of petitions. The Crown declared all grievances void."
The Crown also declared the river safe while it drained it dry.
Moving deeper into the gloom.
Void doesn't mean erased, Seraphine. Not here. Not for House Ash.
He stopped at a lower shelf, pulled out a stack of smaller, cruder papers. These weren't the formal pleas of nobles or merchants. They were children's scribbles, drawn with charcoal and crayon. "Mother is crying again." Marek held one up to the dim light filtering through the high, grimy windows. Every petition from the lower districts mentions the Ash family's estates. Seraphine leaned in, frowning. "That's impossible. House Ash has no jurisdiction over the slums. Read the next line." Marek turned the paper over. The child had written a second sentence, but it was blank. Not smudged. Blank, as if the ink had never touched the page. He grabbed another. Same thing. A plea for food, then a void where the name of the landlord should be.
They're being redacted by force.
Before Seraphine could respond, a voice drifted from the shadows between 2 towering stacks of files. Redaction is such a harsh word. Executioner. I prefer archival preservation. Marek spun around, his hand going to the hilt of his axe. Seraphine drew her sword, the steel ringing out in the silence. From the darkness stepped Ivan Ash, dressed in a suit of immaculate gray silk that seemed untouched by the grime of the hall. He smiled, a thin, cruel expression that didn't reach his eyes.
Ivan,
His voice low.
you own this place? I own the records.
Ivan corrected, gliding forward with an unsettling grace. The people who wrote them are merely contributors, and you have found my private collection. How quaint.
Such raw emotion. It clutters the files. You're hiding something.
Her sword pointing squarely at Ivan's chest.
What did you do to those papers?
Ivan laughed softly. Me? I simply clarified them. The truth is often too messy for public consumption. Sometimes it is better to remove the parts that cause pain. He looked at Marek directly. Do you know what freedom is, Marek? It is having enough money that your name survives your mistakes. Marek didn't flinch. Your family erased children's names. That's not survival. That's theft. Is it? Ivan tilted his head. Or is it efficiency? The system works because we edit out the noise. You, of all people, should understand the value of a clean record. He snapped his fingers. A guard standing by the entrance, who had been following them silently, suddenly dropped to his knees, clutching his head. He whimpered, looking around in panic. Who am I? He babbled.
I need to find her. My daughter. Where is she? She doesn't have a name anymore, nor do you. Not really. You are a line item in House Ash's ledger, and ledgers can be balanced.
He looked back at Marek. Can you defeat a law? Executioner? Or will you just chop the leaves off the tree? Marek stepped forward, his boots crunching on broken glass. You're not a law. You're a man pretending to be one. And men have weaknesses. The soldier was clawing at his own tunic, tears streaming down his face, looking for a child who no longer existed in his mind. Ivan watched with the detached curiosity of a scholar observing a bug under glass.
This is not cruelty.
Stepping around the weeping guard without breaking stride.
This is maintenance. When a name loses its meaning, it becomes waste. House Ash recycles waste.
Marek didn't move his axe. He kept his eyes locked on Ivan's face, searching for the mechanism behind the power, the trick in the sleeve, the spell on the tongue. There was none. The horror was purely administrative.
You can't just erase people.
Her voice tight with rage.
That's a felony against the natural order. Natura is slow, law is swift. You see chaos, I see clarity. Look at this petition.
He plucked a crumpled sheet from the air as if it were floating down. It was a child's drawing of a house, but the roof was missing.
See? The roof fell in because the foundation was named incorrectly. By removing the error, I saved the structure. Is that so hard to understand, Captain? I understand theft.
He took a step forward, the rusted axe heavy in his hand.
When you stole this guard's memory, did you ask his consent? Or did you just decide his life was too costly to keep intact? Consent is a luxury of those who own their history.
He dropped the petition back onto the pile. It vanished into the stack instantly, swallowed by the hungry paper. You are new to this, executioner. You think power is loud? It is quiet. It is the silence after the signature. Marek felt the weight of his own name pressing against his skin, a phantom itch he couldn't scratch. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind pushing against the invisible web of influence that hung over the room. The law of blood hummed in his veins, cold and hungry, but it offered no weapon against something that didn't bleed.
If you can edit reality, then you have to write it down first. Show me the source.
Ivan's smile widened, revealing teeth that looked too white for this dark place. You are clever. Very well. He turned to a towering desk in the center of the room, piled high with leather-bound ledgers that seemed to breathe. Every name has a ledger. Every debt has an entry. If you wish to challenge the law, you must find the error in the text. He slammed his hand on the desk. The air shimmered, and a single book slid out from under the pile, floating toward Marek. It hit him in the chest, knocking the wind out of him. He caught it instinctively. The cover was blank, but as his fingers touched it, words burned into the leather. Lady Elian Ash. Marek opened the book. The pages were filled with names, all struck through in red ink except one. A signature at the bottom, shaky and faint, almost hidden by the stamp of House Ash's seal.
Your mother,
His voice dropping to a whisper.
Elian. She tried to sell her name, to save you, but we did not allow it. We bought it. We own her silence.
Marek looked up, his blood running cold. The signature was real. The seal was forged. The crime was documented in the very book Ivan had given him.
You lied. You didn't erase her. You buried her. I optimized her.
Ivan corrected. A ghost is easier to manage than a ghost with legal standing. Now, executioner. Do you have the courage to rewrite the law? Or will you just chop at the shadows? Seraphine lowered her sword slightly, her eyes wide as she looked from Marek to the book in his hands. The guard on the floor had stopped crying and was now staring at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Marek clutched the book to his chest. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The words were gone, replaced by a single terrifying realization that echoed in the hollow of his ribs. Your name is currently being indexed by House Ash. Challenge condition discovered. A name cannot be owned by one who cannot speak it truthfully. New evidence item, Lady Elian Ash's unfinished petition. Marek's thumb brushed the edge of Lady Elian Ash's signature. The ink was dry, brittle, but the paper beneath it felt warm, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic throb that matched his own heartbeat. He didn't look up at Ivan yet. He looked at the gap in the text where the rest of the sentence should have been. A jagged tear in the parchment, as if something had ripped through the page to escape or be consumed.
The petition was unfinished.
Keeping his voice steady despite the cold sweat tracking down his spine.
You said you erased her name, but this is a contract, an incomplete one.
Ivan adjusted his cuffs, the silk whispering against his skin. He stepped closer, invading Marek's personal space with the ease of someone who knew he was untouchable. He reached out and tapped the torn edge of the page.
Incomplete contracts are void. Law requires finality. If the signature is there, but the terms are absent, the name belongs to no one. And in my house, names that belong to no one are mine to assign.
That's not law.
Her sword still raised but trembling slightly in her grip. That's theft dressed up as logic. Ivan sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. He looked at Seraphine, then back at Marek. You both think in binaries, good and bad, legal and illegal. It is so quaint. But reality is a spectrum of debt. Lady Elian Ash owed us for the blood she spilled to bring you into this world. We simply collected. She signed away her identity to pay the principal. The interest, however... He leaned in, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the archive. The interest was that we would never speak her name again. To say it would be to admit a debt existed. And House Ash does not admit debt. Marek felt the weight of the axe in his hand change. It was no longer just a tool of execution, it was a lever. He looked at the torn page, then at Ivan's face. The heir's mask was slipping, just for a second, revealing the terror beneath. He was afraid not of violence, but of exposure. Precisely. Ivan straightened up, regaining his composure.
And that makes her a ghost. And ghosts cannot challenge the living. But I can.
He turned the page over. On the reverse side, faint pencil marks scratched into the heavy paper, not words. Coordinates. A map. This isn't just a contract, it's a location. She didn't just sign away her name. She signed away her burial plot. Ivan's smile froze. The air in the room grew colder, the shadows stretching long and thin toward the center of the hall.
You are digging in graves you do not understand. Executioner.
His voice dropping an octave.
Some names are buried for a reason. They rot the earth if unearthed.
Then let them rot.
Stepping beside Marek, she lowered her sword tip until it pointed at the floor between them and Ivan. But you're not digging alone. We have the book. We have the map, and we have the law of blood. You can't erase a fact that's written in stone, Ivan, even if your ledgers try to pretend it isn't there. Ivan laughed, but it was a sharp, jagged sound. He snapped his fingers again. The lights in the archive flickered, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat before sputtering back on. When the light returned, 2 new guards had appeared at the door. They wore no uniforms, no insignia. Their faces were smooth, featureless masks of white porcelain.
These are my archivists. They do not forget. They do not question. They only correct.
He looked at Marek with pity.
You think you have found a loophole? You have found a trap. Lady Elian's petition was unfinished because she died before she could complete it. Her name is unclaimed, and unclaimed names are the most dangerous thing in this kingdom. Why?
He didn't move. He kept his eyes on Ivan, watching for a twitch, a blink, anything that would give away the mechanics of the spell.
Because it can be anyone's, and because it can be no one's. Including yours.
Marek looked down at his own hands. For a fraction of a second, he saw his fingers blur, turning translucent. He felt the tug of the ledger, the invisible hook in his navel pulling him toward the book in his arms. The name Marek Vale was being indexed, sorted, filed.
He's indexing us.
Her voice tight with horror. She backed away from Ivan, her sword raised high. Marek, don't touch the book. Marek ignored her. He looked at the torn edge of Elian's signature again. The law of blood didn't just kill, it revealed. It showed the truth of a debt. And the truth was that House Ash was lying. They were hoarding. Marek tore the page from the book with a sound like a gunshot. The parchment resisted, fibers screaming before snapping, but he wrenched it free, clutching both the torn signature and the map to his chest. He did not look at the archivists. He looked at Ivan.
You said ghosts cannot challenge the living.
Marek shouted over the sudden rush of wind that whipped through the archive, scattering loose papers like startled birds. But a ghost who owns her own name owns the debt. Ivan's face tightened. The amusement drained away, replaced by a cold, sharp calculation. You are playing with fire, executioner. That page is not yours to keep. Seraphine lunged forward, her sword flashing in the dim light. She didn't strike Ivan, she struck the air between them. A spark of violet energy crackled from her blade, hitting the porcelain-faced archivists. They did not flinch. They stepped closer,
Marek,
her voice low and urgent.
move. Now.
Marek backed away, his heels scraping against the stone floor. He kept his eyes locked on Ivan. You can't take it. Not while the law of blood binds us to this moment. The debt is active. The name is unclaimed. That means it's open for inheritance. Ivan smiled, but it was a thin, predatory expression.
Inheritance requires a will, and Elian died without one. She signed away her rights. Her legacy is ash. She didn't sign away her right to be heard.
He held up the torn page. The faint pencil marks seemed to glow under the archive's flickering lights. She signed away her burial plot, which means she left us a map to where House Ash hid what they couldn't erase. Ivan's smile vanished. He took a step forward, his hands raised as if casting a spell. The air around him shimmered, distorting his form like heat haze.
You think you understand how this works? You think you can walk out of here with that paper and change anything? I know exactly what I'm doing.
His voice was steady, grounded by the weight of the axe in his other hand, and the blood singing in his veins. I'm exposing a lie, and lies break when they're spoken aloud. Seraphine grunted as one of the porcelain archivists grabbed her wrist. Its grip was like iron. She kicked him in the knee, but he didn't react. He didn't blink. He just held on. Marek, Seraphine yelled, struggling against the unyielding grasp. The door! Go! Marek turned and ran. He didn't look back. He sprinted toward the far end of the hall, where a narrow staircase led down into the deeper archives. The sound of Ivan's voice chased him, not angry, but calm. You can run, Marek Vale, but you cannot run from your name. The stairs were steep and slick with damp moss. Marek took them two at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear Seraphine's shouts fading behind him, the clash of steel as she fought to free herself. He didn't stop. He couldn't. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a smaller chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, but instead of books, they held thousands of small glass jars. Each jar contained a swirling gray mist. Labels were attached to each one, written in delicate, elegant script: name, date, depth. Marek set the torn page on a nearby desk. His hands were shaking. He looked around for something to write with, but there was only an empty inkwell and a quill. He didn't have time to find paper. He needed to anchor the truth. He grabbed the quill, dipped it in the inkwell, and began to trace the map on the back of his own executioner's coat. The fabric absorbed the ink instantly, the lines burning themselves into the leather. He wasn't just drawing a map, he was claiming the land. He was declaring that the dead existed. As he finished the last line, the air in the room grew heavy. The jars on the shelves began to rattle. The mists inside swirled faster, forming shapes, faces, screaming faces. "You're trying to claim a void," Ivan's voice echoed from the doorway above. He stood there, silhouetted against the light from the hall below. A name unclaimed is no name at all. It is nothing, and you cannot build a house on nothing. Marek looked up, wiping ink from his fingers. "Then I'll build it on blood, on the blood of every child whose petition vanished because of your lie, on the blood of every person you erased to keep your power clean." Ivan stepped down into the room. He didn't look afraid anymore. He looked bored. "You are sentimental, Marek Vale. It is your weakness. You think truth is a weapon, but truth is just data, and data can be edited." He raised a hand. The jars on the shelves began to shatter. The mists poured out, rushing toward Marek like a tidal wave of gray smoke. "Stop." Seraphine's voice came from the stairs. She had broken free of the archivist and was running down, her sword blazing with light. "Marek, don't let it touch you." But Marek didn't move. He stood his ground. He looked at Ivan. "You can edit data, but you can't erase what happened. The petition is unfinished." That means the rain hammered against the stone walls of the archive, a relentless drumbeat that matched the thrumming pressure in Marek's skull. The air smelled of wet parchment and ancient dust, thick with the ozone tang of unraveling magic. Ivan Ash stood at the center of the room, surrounded by floating scrolls that writhed like serpents in the dark. His fingers moved through the air, weaving threads of silver light that latched onto every record of Marek's existence.
Stop.
Stepping forward. The water on his coat dripped onto the flagstones, pooling around his boots. Ivan did not look up. His eyes were closed, focused entirely on the intricate lattice of power connecting him to the royal archives. Identity is a contract, Vale, and contracts can be voided by the party with greater authority. House Ash holds the seal of origin. You do not. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the cracked silver ring he had worn since the gallows. It felt cold, heavier than lead. Ivan's eyes snapped open. They were pale, almost transparent, reflecting the chaotic dance of the scrolls around them. Choice is an illusion created by those who cannot see the larger design. You are an anomaly, a glitch in the ledger. I will correct you. He raised both hands. The scrolls surged forward, their ink lifting off the page to form jagged spikes aimed at Marek's heart. The pressure in the room spiked, making Marek's vision blur. He could feel his name slipping, the memory of who he was becoming fluid, malleable, like wet clay.
Let me guess.
Wiping blood from a cut on his palm, where the ring had dug in during his struggle. Ivan stepped closer, his robe whispering against the floor.
And ghosts do not get trials. They get erased.
Marek looked at his bleeding hand. The blood was dark, almost black in the dim light, but it pulsed with a rhythm that felt older than the stone around them. He remembered the axe on Gallowsgate. He remembered the oath he had made to the broken spirit. It wasn't about power, it was about accountability. He pressed his bleeding palm flat against the cold stone floor. The moment his skin touched the ground, a shockwave rippled out from him. The ring on his finger flared with a white-hot intensity, burning his flesh but holding fast to his will. "My name is Marek Vale," he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the noise of the archives. The force of the statement hit Ivan like a physical blow. He staggered back, his hands dropping from the weaving pattern. The scrolls around him shrieked, their silver light flickering and dimming as they lost their connection to the master contract. "You cannot," Ivan gasped, clutching his chest.
That is impossible. The law of names is absolute. It was absolute when you wrote it.
Rising to his feet, he kept his hand pressed to the floor, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him. "But you forgot one thing. A freely chosen oath resists forced amendment." Ivan stared at him, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized the loophole had been opened. The archive was waking up, not with spells or swords, but with names. Whispers began to rise from the stacks below, growing louder as forgotten petitioners remembered their own identities.
Ivan Ash.
Using the younger name for the first time, stripping away the title. Ivan trembled, the silver threads around him snapping one by one. What do you want? The 7 houses will not let this stand. They will destroy us both. Marek wiped his bloody hand on his coat, leaving a dark smear against the fabric. He looked at the crumbling heir to House Ash, not with pity, but with calculation.
I want the truth. Help me expose the 7 houses. Expose the Chancellor's murder of thousands. I will find the truth about your mother if you help me tear down their lies.
Ivan looked at the rising tide of voices in the archive, then back at Marek. He straightened his robe, wiping tears from his face. But I have no choice. Then we have a bargain. Ivan straightened his cuffs, the silver threads snapping like dead wires around his wrists. The air in the archive grew still, the whispering petitions fading into a wary silence as the weight of the bargain hung between them.
You expect me to turn against my blood. My house built this kingdom on the lie that names are property. I expect you to stop being a clerk for murderers.
Marek replied. He pulled his hand from the floor, leaving a stark red palm print on the stone. The ring on his finger dimmed, its heat retreating into the metal, but the glow in his eyes remained cold and sharp. And I expect you to give me access to the Chancellery's private ledger, not the public records, the ones where Vaust hides the bodies. Ivan laughed, a dry, brittle sound that echoed off the towering shelves.
The Chancellor does not share ledgers with heirs. He shares them with ghosts, and you are becoming one by the hour. Then help me become a ghost who can haunt him.
He stepped closer, invading Ivan's personal space until the scent of old ink and ozone overwhelmed the smell of rain. Or I leave you here to explain to the 7 houses why their law of names just broke on a man with no name. Ivan flinched. It was small, barely a tremor in his jaw, but Marek saw it. Fear. Real fear. Not the theatrical terror of a magician whose trick has been seen through, but the primal dread of a man who realizes he is outmatched by something he cannot file away.
You think this is about power? You think you have won because you can choose your own label?
I know I have won because I'm still here to say it, and so are you. That means our contracts are still open.
Ivan turned away, walking toward a massive desk carved from black wood. He ran a finger along the edge, checking for any residual magical signature. I saw the chains on Nima's throat. They lead to his ring. And you think exposing him will stop the flooding? Ivan turned back, his expression grim.
The flood is not a side effect, Vale. It is a feature. The river rises because House Ash drains it. If you expose him, you do not just kill a man, you break the mechanism that keeps the capital from drowning in its own greed. Then we fix the mechanism. We don't let it drown. We divert the blame. We make the 7 houses pay for their silence.
Ivan stared at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his robe and pulled out a key made of bone, slender and delicate. He held it out, palm up. It caught the dim light of the archive, glinting like a tooth.
This opens the sublevels, below the Chancellery, where the ward engines are fed directly from the riverbed. Go there, record what you find. Use your law of blood to witness it.
Marek took the key. It was warm, pulsing faintly with residual magic.
Why give this to me? You could sell it to any noble who wants to blackmail Vaust, because I am tired of being a story.
His voice cracked, just once.
I want to be the author of my own ending, even if it is short.
Marek tucked the key into his pocket. The weight of it felt dangerous, heavy with consequences he had not yet calculated.
Come with me. No.
He shook his head, backing away toward the shadows of the stacks. If I leave this room, House Ash will brand me a traitor. They will hunt me. You are already an anomaly. You have nowhere to hide, which means you have nowhere for them to catch you. Be the needle. I will be the thread that holds it together. You're running, Marek observed. He did not move, keeping his hand near his axe's strap, though he had left the weapon on the gallows days ago. The law was in his blood now, not in steel. I am positioning myself, Ivan corrected. There is a difference. Go, before the wards above sense my breach. Marek nodded once. He did not thank him. Gratitude was a currency he could not afford to spend yet. Instead, he turned and walked toward the heavy iron doors at the end of the hall. The whispers of the petitioners rose with him, their voices no longer a chaotic storm but a focused hum, chanting his name. Marek Vale, Marek Vale. He paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. Ivan stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the falling dust of erased records. He looked small against the scale of the archive, a boy playing at godhood who had finally realized the cost of the game.
Don't let them erase you. Ivan,
Marek said.
I won't.
His voice was steady now, stripped of its theatrical flair.
I have chosen my name.
Marek stepped through the doors. The iron clicked shut behind him, sealing the archive away. He was alone in the corridor, the damp stone walls pressing in. He could feel the weight of the bone key in his pocket, and he could feel the weight of the bone key in his pocket, and the hum of the petitioners fading into a low, steady thrum in his chest. The corridor sloped downward, the air growing colder and thicker with the scent of stagnant water and old ozone. Marek's boots made no sound on the wet flagstones. He kept his hand near the hilt of the rusted axe he had taken from Gallows Gate. It felt heavy, an anchor in a world that was trying to dissolve him. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, leaning against a pillar of black marble. He wore the crimson sash of the Chancellery Guard, but his face was pale, stripped of its usual bureaucratic indifference. The guard held a lantern that burned with a sickly green flame. "You're not supposed to be down here," the guard said. His voice was flat, devoid of fear, as if he were reading from a script he didn't want to believe. "The sublevels are restricted, by order of the Chancellor." Marek stopped 5 paces away. He did not raise his weapon. He let the silence stretch, letting the guard hear the drip of water in the darkness. "I am Marek Vale," he said.
Last executioner. I have a warrant.
It was a dry, crackling sound.
You have no warrant. You have no name. The records say you are a ghost. A mistake. Go back up, Vale, before the wards decide to test your blood. I don't need a warrant.
He took a step forward. The guard flinched, just slightly.
I have a key.
He pulled the bone key from his pocket. It glowed faintly, casting long, jagged shadows against the marble. The guard's eyes widened, not with wonder, but with recognition of something ancient and dangerous. "That's impossible," the guard whispered.
That key was destroyed in the Purge of 92.
Ivan Ash gave it to me.
He used the name deliberately, watching how it tasted in the damp air. "And now he wants you to move aside." The guard shook his head, gripping his lantern tighter.
Ivan is a traitor. If I let you pass, I become an accomplice. The 7 houses will have my head on a pike before dawn. Then take it.
He tossed the key onto the wet stone between them. It clattered loudly in the quiet corridor. "Or let me pass. Your choice is a contract you can't break, guard. But mine is still open." The guard stared at the key. He looked at Marek. He looked down the dark tunnel where the ward engines hummed like trapped insects. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. "If I let you go," the guard said slowly, "you'll die in there. Everyone who goes to the engine room dies. The water, it doesn't just drown you, it unrights you." He bent down and picked up the key. The moment his fingers touched it, the hum in his chest grew louder, syncing with the key's pulse. "But I will do it openly, and when I am gone, the truth will remain." Is that not worth more than your service to a chancellor who sells your life for river water? The guard's hand trembled. He looked at his own hands, calloused and stained with ink. He looked at Marek, who stood like a statue carved from rain and iron,
The ward engines.
his voice dropping to a whisper. "They run on blood oaths, not just water. The river feeds the magic, but the people. The riverbound, they feed the fear. If you break the chain, the fear breaks too." He moved past the guard, close enough to see the terror in his eyes. "Then I will break it." The guard did not stop him. He stepped aside, pressing himself against the cold wall as if trying to disappear. As Marek walked past, he paused and looked back.
Why tell me?
The guard pulled his hood up, hiding his face.
Because I have a daughter in the river bound.
I didn't know why she kept sending letters about the rising water until today. Now I know. Marek nodded once. He did not speak again. He turned and continued down the corridor, deeper into the dark. The air grew colder, the smell of ozone becoming overwhelming. He could hear the thrum of the engines now, a deep, rhythmic pounding that shook the floor. Beneath his feet, he reached a massive door at the end of the hall. It was made of black iron, studded with silver runes that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He inserted the bone key into the lock. It turned with a grinding shriek, the metal protesting the intrusion. The door swung open. Inside, the chamber was vast, a cavernous space carved directly into the bedrock beneath the palace. In the center stood 3 massive engines, their pistons rising and falling like the lungs of a dying beast. Pipes ran from the ceiling, dripping with dark water that smelled of blood and iron. Standing on the platform between the engines was a man in a white suit, pristine and untouched by the grime of the lower levels. He held a clipboard, reviewing documents as if he were in an office, not a slaughterhouse. Chancellor Vaust did not look up from his clipboard. The scratching of his quill was the only sound besides the mechanical thud of the pistons. Marek Vale, he said finally. He wrote the name down, then crossed it out with a single fluid stroke, a phantom. A draft that hasn't been edited yet? How quaint. Marek stepped onto the platform. The metal grated under his boots. The rain from the ceiling soaked his coat, but the cold did not reach him anymore. The law of blood burned in his veins, a hot, jagged line of fire. You are bleeding the kingdom, Chancellor. I have seen the chains. I have heard the petitioners. Vaust finally looked up. His eyes were pale like washed-out glass.
Chains are necessary for order. The river rises because the people are loud. I quiet them. It is a mercy. Would you rather they drown in chaos? I would rather they be free.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out the bone key. It pulsed, bright and white against the gloom. I have come to cut them. Vaust stood up. He tucked the clipboard under his arm. He smiled, a thin, cruel stretching of lips.
You think you can challenge the law? I am the law. I am the ink that binds this world. You are just a man with an axe and a name he stole from a dead executioner. I chose my name.
The words felt heavy, solid.
It belongs to me, and so does the truth. Truth is a luxury.
He waved his hand. The air in the chamber shifted. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, forming into shapes of ink and silence. They moved toward Marek, their faces blank, their voices silent screams. The 7 houses have decided your fate, Vale. You are an anomaly. Anomalies are deleted. Marek raised his hand. The ring on his finger flared, a silver star in the dark.
You cannot delete what is real. Everything is text,
He spread his arms.
and I hold the pen.
The shadows lunged. Marek swung his axe, not at the shadows, but at the floor. The rusted steel bit into the stone. Cracks spider-webbed outward. The law of blood screamed in his mind, demanding payment. Pay, it whispered. Pay with your name. Marek slashed his palm open. Blood welled up, dark and thick. He pressed his bleeding hand against the floorboards. My name is Marek Vale, he roared.
I choose it. I claim it.
The blood spread across the stone, glowing red. The shadows shrieked, dissolving into mist as they touched the glowing veins. Vaust staggered back, clutching his chest.
What have you done? You cannot anchor yourself in a world of contracts. You are outside the system. I am the loophole.
He stood up, holding his bleeding hand high. The ring blazed with light. And I am here to read the verdict. Vaust laughed, but it was a broken sound.
The verdict? There is no verdict for you. You are nothing. You are no one. I am someone.
He pointed the axe at Vaust.
I am the executioner. And you are the guilty.
The chamber shook. The engines groaned, their rhythm faltering. The pipes burst, spraying dark water everywhere. Vaust fell to his knees, clutching his head.
Stop. Stop it. You'll kill us all. I will save them.
He stepped closer.
And I will save myself.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a petition, one of the thousands he had collected. He held it up. "This is the law," he said.
The law of the people. And it says you are done.
Vaust stared at the paper. His face went white.
No, that's impossible. The archives. I control the archives. You controlled the lie. Now the truth is out.
He brought the axe down, not on Vaust, but on the central pipe of the largest engine. Steel met metal. Sparks flew. The pipe burst. A geyser of black water erupted, drenching Vaust in filth. The Chancellor screamed as the water stripped away his white suit, revealing the rot beneath. Marek watched him fall. He did not feel triumph. He felt only the weight of the work ahead. He turned to the door, his coat heavy with rain and blood. "Come with me," he called out into the dark. "The trial begins now." There was no answer, only the sound of the engines dying, one by one, and the distant, rising voice of the city above, waking up for the first time in 1,000 years. The air down here tasted of wet stone and old iron. It was a cold, damp chill that seemed to seep through the soles of my boots, settling into the marrow. I led the way, the rusted axe heavy in my grip, its weight unfamiliar yet undeniable. Behind me, Seraphine moved with the rigid tension of a drawn bowstring, her hand never straying far from the hilt of her sword. Ivan Ash followed, his steps light and silent, a ghost in his own right.
We are not ready for this.
His voice echoed slightly in the vast darkness, bouncing off walls that seemed to stretch infinitely upward.
But readiness is a luxury we sold long ago. Speak plainly, heir.
She did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the shadows ahead.
We do not have time for riddles. The palace above us is built on a lie.
He raised his hand, and a small, pale light gathered in his palm, illuminating the damp stone before us. And lies require foundations. We are digging out those foundations now. I tightened my grip on the axe handle. The metal was cold against my skin. Then let us hope it holds up when we pull the first brick. We descended through a spiral staircase, carved directly into the bedrock. It was narrow, winding down into the earth like a throat-swallowing stone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of our breathing and the occasional drip of water somewhere deep below. "Why here?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in the confined space.
The archive is above ground. The truth we need should be in the records. Records can be burned.
She stopped for a moment, listening to the darkness ahead.
Truth buried in stone remains, even if it screams.
Ivan laughed, a short, sharp sound that faded quickly into the gloom. A poetic sentiment, Captain, but I prefer efficiency. The archive key I stole was not for paper records. It was for this place, the original court.
I have never heard of such a place in any history book. That is because it does not exist in any book.
He continued walking, his pace steady.
It exists in the blood of every king who sat on that throne. And right now, Marek, you are holding the only key that matters.
I glanced down at the axe. The rust seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light.
Me? I hold a weapon, not a key. You hold the law.
She finally turned to look at me, her eyes hard and clear.
You made it your own when you cut the chains. That is not just metal around your hand. It is authority, and this place answers to authority.
I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I looked ahead, into the darkness.
And if it does not answer, then we stand our ground, or we die trying.
The staircase opened suddenly into a cavern so vast I could not see the walls. The pale light from Ivan's hand illuminated only a fraction of the space before fading back into the black. But even in the dimness, I could see the scale of it. It was not just a room, it was a canyon, carved and shaped by hands long dead. In the center of this cavern hung a figure. I stopped breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Suspended by chains of black iron was a man. He was old, his skin gray and sagging, his hair white and thin, but it was not his appearance that froze me. It was the crown upon his head. It was made of ash or something that looked like it, shifting and settling like smoke frozen in time.
King Orlan, he has been sleeping here for years. He is not sleeping,
Seraphine said. Her voice was tight.
Look at his face.
I leaned forward, squinting against the gloom. The king's eyes were open, They were wide, unblinking, and filled with a terror so profound it made my stomach turn. His mouth moved, shaping words that no sound produced.
He is arguing, always arguing, against the thing beneath him.
I followed his gaze downward. Beneath the suspended king was a door. It was massive, made of obsidian that drank the light from Ivan's hand. Carved into its surface were names, thousands of them etched in gold that gleamed faintly in the dark. Each name represented a monarch of Vair, stretching back to the beginning of time.
That door, it is not an entrance. It is a seal, a prison contract.
Ivan corrected. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform we had reached. The chains holding the king creaked as he shifted in his sleep-like state, and the system has just identified it. I felt the law around me shift, twisting like a coil tightening. I could feel the structure of the contract beneath the door, its terms and conditions laid bare in my mind. It was not just a lock, it was a living thing, feeding on the king's despair, growing stronger with every passing day. What does it say? I asked. Marek's fingers tightened around the haft of the axe until his knuckles turned white. The law pulsed against his palm, hot and insistent, demanding interpretation. He looked from the weeping king to the sealed door below, then back to Ivan.
Interpret it, now.
Ivan stepped closer to the edge of the stone platform. His face was illuminated by the faint, dying glow of his palm light, casting long shadows across his features. He looked small against the backdrop of the cavern, yet his presence dominated the space.
The system is reading the seal as a prison contract, but it is more than that. It is a containment vessel for the kingdom's legitimacy.
Legitimacy?
She drew her sword a fraction of an inch, the metal singing softly in the silence.
You speak in riddles while the king hangs above us like a broken doll. He is not a doll, he is a party to a trial. Look at his eyes, Captain. Really look at them.
Marek leaned in again.
He is arguing.
Marek said.
What is he saying? The first defendant.
He pointed a trembling finger at the obsidian door.
Beneath him lies the entity that challenged his right to rule. A case that has been ongoing since the founding of Vair. The king is fighting to keep the crown. But he is losing.
Why hasn't he abdicated? Seraphine demanded. Her hand hovered over her sword hilt, knuckles white.
If he is losing, why doesn't he give up? Why let the city drown above while he plays lawyer in the dark? Because of the Ash Crown Compact.
He turned to face them, his expression grim.
I found the clause in the stolen archive.
If the capital loses its structural integrity, its stability, the king's claim is void. The crown does not go to a successor.
It transfers automatically. To whom?
The question felt heavy in his throat, like swallowing stone.
To the prisoner below, to the first defendant.
The silence that followed was absolute. Even the drip of water from the ceiling seemed to stop. Marek looked down at the sealed door. The names etched into it seemed to writhe in the dim light, shifting and changing like smoke. He felt the law thrumming in his veins, urging him to challenge the terms, to find a loophole, any loophole.
How long? How much time do we have before the transfer completes? The system provides an estimate.
He raised his other hand, and a holographic interface flickered into existence above his palm, casting a blue light over the stone floor. The capital's stability is at 42% and falling. With the river rising and the populace in revolt, the projection is clear. Seraphine read the numbers from the air, her eyes widening with each digit. 18 days, she whispered. 6 hours? That is not a lifetime. That is a countdown. It is a deadline, Ivan corrected.
And we are the only ones who know it exists. If the people above knew that their king was selling his crown to save himself, the panic would accelerate the collapse. The transfer would happen sooner. And if we do nothing?
His voice was low, dangerous.
The first defendant takes the throne, and whatever he or she wants from Vair, it will not be preservation. It will be liquidation.
Seraphine sheathed her sword with a sharp click. The sound echoed through the cavern, startlingly loud. We need to wake him up, she said, nodding toward the suspended king.
If he is fighting a legal battle, waking him might allow him to change his strategy, to find a counterclaim. You cannot wake a man who is dreaming in real time.
He lowered his hand, letting the interface fade.
The dream trial is woven into his soul. To pull him out would kill him instantly. The connection is too strong.
Then we argue for him.
He looked at the axe in his hands, then at the door below.
If he is bound by a contract, I can challenge it.
The law of blood responds to injustice. This contract binds an innocent man to a false trial. It is corrupt.
It is illegal.
Ivan stared at him for a long moment. Then, a slow, reluctant smile spread across his face. "That is the most dangerous thing you could possibly say," he murmured.
But it is also the only thing that might work.
How?
She looked from Ivan to Marek, her brow furrowed.
You can rewrite laws in the air? You cannot even lift your sword with one hand anymore, Vale.
Marek felt the weight of the axe shift in his grip. It was no longer just a tool. It was an extension of his will. He could feel the threads of the contract beneath the door, taut and vibrating with tension. He could see the flaws in its weave, the inconsistencies that screamed of manipulation.
I don't need to lift my sword.
He stepped forward toward the edge of the platform. The wind from below whipped his coat around his legs.
I just need to speak the truth is not a weapon you wield.
He stepped closer to the edge, his face pale in the gloom.
It is a detonator. You pull that trigger, you do not just break the contract, you break the king.
Marek tightened his grip on the axe handle. The wood was slick with sweat and rain from the upper levels, but it felt solid, real, unlike the shifting nightmare beneath them. If the contract is illegal, then the king's imprisonment is a crime. I am an executioner. I execute crimes. You are a public defender, Seraphine corrected sharply. She moved to his side, her eyes fixed on the sealed door.
There is a difference. One protects, the other ends. If you challenge this seal, you are not saving him. You are sentencing him to the same fate he tried to escape. Then, I will sentence the system.
He looked down at the obsidian surface. The names etched into it seemed to pulse in rhythm with the king's heartbeat above. Ivan's eyes widened slightly. He pulled his hand back as if burned by the proximity of the seal. A forgery? The archives do not suggest. The archives are what Vaust allowed me to see, Marek interrupted. His voice was steady, cold.
I know how these things are written.
They are never about justice. They are about control. The first defendant is not a challenger. It is a parasite.
And the king is the host. He calls you executioner, not king.
He looked at Marek with something like awe, or perhaps terror.
You think you can rewrite the compact? With an axe? I think the law of blood demands balance.
An illegal contract cannot stand.
It is void ab initio. If I cut the seal, the trial ends. The king dies, yes, but the crown does not go to the defendant.
It goes to the vacancy. A vacancy?
Her voice was tight.
You mean the throne becomes empty? I mean the system reset.
Marek said. He looked at the axe, then up at Ivan.
If the king is dead by execution of justice, his claim never transfers to a prisoner. The legitimacy returns to the people, or to whoever can hold it. It breaks the link. That is theoretical.
He shook his head.
The compact is old, older than the ash crown. It might survive your axe. If it does, you have killed the king for no reason, and left Vare leaderless while the river rises.
Better a leaderless city than a conquered one.
He raised the axe. The blade caught the faint light from Ivan's palm, gleaming dull and red.
I will not let him feed something that eats us all. He is begging.
She pointed at the king's face.
Look!
His eyes, they are not just darting. He is looking at you. He knows you are there. He is screaming for help, Marek. Not for himself.
For us.
Marek paused. The wind from below swirled up, carrying a sound that was almost human. It was the murmur of voices, thousands of them, trapped in the stone. The first defendant was not alone. It was an army of the wronged, the forgotten, the crushed, and they were waiting for the king to fall.
If I do nothing,
The capital falls in 18 days. 6 hours. We have no time to argue precedent. We have time to find another way.
He stepped between Marek and the edge.
There is a loophole.
A clause for emergency succession. If the king cannot rule, a regent may be appointed, someone with
Authority.
Who? I don't know yet.
Ivan admitted. He turned to look at Marek. But it requires a candidate who is not bound by the compact, and it requires the consent of the first defendant. Marek lowered the axe slightly.
You want me to negotiate with the thing beneath us? I want you to listen to it.
He knelt down, pressing his ear toward the seal.
It is not just a parasite.
It is a grievance. If we can satisfy the grievance, the case collapses. The king dies by natural causes,
The crown stays in Vare. And if we fail,
Marek asked.
then I stand between you and the axe.
He looked up, his eyes fierce.
I will not let you make a mistake that kills millions.
Marek looked at Seraphine. She nodded slowly, her hand still on her sword. She did not trust Ivan, but she trusted Marek's judgment, and she knew that waiting was no longer an option.
Talk to it.
He stepped back from the edge, letting Ivan take his place.
But if you hear it lie, I will swing.
Ivan took a deep breath. He placed his hand on the cold obsidian. First defendant, he called out. His voice echoed down into the dark, bouncing off the walls, returning distorted and layered. We have come to end your trial. But we require terms. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against their eardrums. Then a voice rose from below. The voice did not come from the door. It came from everywhere, vibrating in the marrow of Marek's bones, tasting of copper and old dust. Terms are for equals, the voice said. You stand on stolen stone. You speak with borrowed breath. What right does a butcher have to demand peace from the Foundation?
Ivan did not flinch. He pressed his palm harder against the obsidian, feeling the cold seep into his skin.
The right of survival, Ivan shouted, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of the weight above them. King Orlan is trapped in a loop of your own making. If he falls, you win. But if you win, Vare drowns. You will be king over a corpse of stone and water. Is that the victory you want? A kingdom is a contract, the voice replied. The sound shifted, becoming less singular, more plural, as if thousands of throats were speaking in unison. Break the contract, and the land returns to nature. Nature does not care for kings, nor for defendants. Why should I spare a city that built its peace on my silence? Marek stepped forward, the axe heavy in his hand. He looked at Seraphine. She was pale, her knuckles white around her sword hilt. Do not let him negotiate us into a corner, she said. Her eyes were fixed on the suspended king. Orlan's body jerked violently, a spasm of pure agony. He is dying. Every second we talk, he loses ground. Ground? The voice laughed, a dry, rattling sound that shook loose dust from the ceiling. You speak of ground to one who has no feet. I am the weight. I am the debt. I am the first defendant. And you, little executioner, are merely the collection agent. Marek felt the axe hum against his palm. The law of blood pulsed in time with the king's frantic heart above. He could see the threads now, not just on the door, but connecting Orlan to the seal, connecting the seal to the earth below. It was a web of pain, woven tight over centuries. He is not a king, Marek said. His voice was calm, cutting through the cavern's echo. He is a prisoner. And you are his jailer. I am his conscience, the defendant countered. He forgot the cost of his crown. I remind him daily, does it not serve justice? To make him feel every life he traded for comfort? Seraphine stepped up beside Marek, drawing her sword just an inch from its scabbard. The steel sang in the damp air. Justice requires a living subject, she said. If Orlan dies in that chair, his suffering ends. Yours does not. You remain bound to this place, to this stone, forever. Is that justice? Or is it just imprisonment? Imprisonment is fairness, the defendant said.
He imprisoned himself. He signed the compact. He chose order over truth.
Now he reaps the harvest. Ivan pulled his hand back from the seal, wincing as if burned. It's not about fairness, he said, turning to Marek, his eyes wide and desperate. It's about the clause. The Ash Crown Compact. It has a trigger. If the capital loses total stability, the succession passes automatically. Automatic, the defendant mused. Yes, that is the beauty of it. No appeal, no stay of execution. When the river takes the streets, the king falls, and I rise. The contract does not require my effort. It requires only his failure. Marek lowered the axe until the flat of the blade touched the stone floor. The metal clicked against the rock, a small, sharp sound in the vast silence. So you are waiting, he said. You are not arguing. You are watching. I am adjudicating, the voice corrected. The case is pending. The outcome is determined by the state of the kingdom. If Vare stands, the king stays. If Vare falls, I take what is owed. How do we know you won't just let it fall? Seraphine asked. She lowered her sword but kept it ready. How do we know you aren't accelerating the collapse right now? I have no motive to hasten my own coronation, the defendant said.
It is inevitable, but I can ensure it is.
Marek looked up at King Orlan. The comatose monarch's eyes were open now, staring blindly into the darkness above. Tears tracked through the grime on his cheeks. He was aware. He was helpless, and he was waiting for Marek to decide whether he died a ruler or a victim.
Ivan.
Marek said, "What happens if we break the link?" Ivan swallowed hard. He looked at the sealed door, then at the king, then at Marek. The trial collapses immediately. The compact is voided by force, but the king is tethered to the dream. If you cut him out, he dies. Instantly. Then we don't cut him, Marek said. He turned his gaze to the door. We challenge the seal, not the king, the contract itself. You cannot void the Ash Crown Compact, the defendant said.
It is older than your axe.
Older than your laws? Everything is younger than blood, Marek said. He raised the axe again, pointing it not at the door, but at the air above the seal. The great hall of Vare smelled of wet wool and old fear. Rain drummed against the high arched windows, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding in Marek Vale's chest. He stood at the center of the stone floor, the rusted execution axe heavy in his hand, its weight grounding him even as the crowd roared below. Above him, on the dais reserved for the judiciary but currently occupied by the terrified remnants of the 7 houses, sat the tribunal. They were not judges, they were predators waiting to see if their prey had grown teeth. House Ash moved first. Ivan Ash leaned forward in his high-backed chair, his fingers drumming a lazy, mocking rhythm on the armrest. He looked less like a noble and more like a scholar inspecting a particularly interesting specimen of rot. Marek did not look at Ivan. He looked past him, at the sealed contracts binding the nobility, then down at his own hands. They were steady. That was the only mercy he knew now.
Because a guilty man admits his crimes when he is cornered.
I admit nothing. I state only facts. A factual account of your atrocities would be a start.
Her hand rested on the hilt of her sword, but her knuckles were white. She was looking at Marek with an expression he couldn't read, something between relief and horror.
The people demand blood, Vale. They do not care for your legalisms. They never do.
Standing up, he walked to the edge of the dais, peering down at the sea of faces in the lower levels. The air shimmered with their anger. Marek lifted the axe. He didn't raise it in threat. He simply held it out, palm open, as if presenting an object of interest. I swung for truth, and truth is a debt that must be paid. What are you babbling about? A noble from House Vane shouted from the back row. His face was pale, sweat slicking his brow despite the chill.
Seize him, before he invokes some new nonsense. No nonsense.
He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, reaching for the law he had carved into, the air with Vaust's blood. It hummed in his veins, cold and sharp. Law of blood. The air above the courtroom cracked. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure drop, a sudden vacuum that sucked the breath from everyone's lungs. Then, text ignited in the air. Not fire, not light, but ink made manifest, flowing from nowhere into everything. It poured down like rain, but instead of water, it carried names, numbers, dates, amounts of gold and years of labor stripped away in secret chambers. 7,421 unpaid debts. They hung over the dais, glowing with a sickly amber light. Each name was a life. Each number was a theft so vast it had starved villages to keep these chairs warm. Ivan stopped drumming his fingers. He stared at the floating text, his eyes widening.
What is this? It is the bill.
His voice was quiet, but in the sudden silence of the hall, it carried to every corner. Chancellor Vaust did not drain the river for magic. He drained it to pay these debts. The illegal contract was not about power, it was about balance. And you, House Ash, are item number 412. Ivan's composure cracked, just a fraction, a twitch in his jaw.
I am doing exactly what your master could not.
He took a step forward, the axe dripping with nothing but the memory of steel. I am making them visible. Seraphine stepped between Marek and the dais, her sword drawn halfway.
Vale, stand down. This is causing panic. No.
His voice was tight, strained. He turned from the glowing debt to look at Marek. For the first time, he looked afraid. Not of death, but of exposure.
This is chaos. You are tearing the foundation of the kingdom apart. The foundation is rotten. I am just showing you the termites.
Below them, the crowd surged. The names were spreading now, dripping onto the stone, burning into the eyes of the citizens. Murmurs turned to shouts. Names people had forgotten. Debts they had been told never existed. Look! A voice screamed from the lower ranks.
It says my name. It says my grain was taken. That is a lie.
But his voice wavered. He looked at Seraphine.
Captain Rowe, remove him. Remove him before he drags us all into the abyss.
Seraphine looked at Ivan. Then she looked at Marek. The glow of the debt text reflected in her eyes, turning them gold and red. She lowered her sword an inch.
He is not dragging you anywhere. He is handing you the knife.
She turned her back on Marek, facing the dais. Ivan stared at Seraphine's back, as if she had sprouted a second head. His fingers tightened on the armrest until the wood groaned under his grip. Captain, you are compromised. Your loyalty is to the crown, not to this butcher. Seraphine did not turn around. Her hand remained on her sword hilt, but her posture shifted from defensive to predatory. She faced the dais, her voice cutting through the rising roar of the crowd below. My oath is to the people of Vere, and for the first time in my life, they are speaking louder than the nobles. You side with a monster. Ivan's voice cracked, losing its theatrical polish. He stood up fully now, his chair scraping loudly against the stone. He looked around the dais, seeking support from the other houses. House Vane, House Krell, do you see what he is doing? He is unraveling the social contract itself. A noble from House Vane scrambled backward, knocking over a goblet of wine. The red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth like fresh blood. I cannot read it all, the man stammered, his eyes darting wildly at the floating numbers.
There are too many. If he looks at my name, he already has.
He turned back to Marek, his face pale beneath his usual arrogance. Stop this, immediately. Invoke your authority and seal the ledger. You have made your point. Now restore order. Marek took a slow step down from the dais. The rusted axe swung gently at his side.
There is no order in a lie, Ivan. You want me to seal it because you are afraid of what happens when the truth stays open. I am afraid of the chaos.
Ivan shouted. He pointed a trembling finger at Marek.
You think you are freeing them? You are starving them. You are breaking the peace that keeps the wolves from the door.
He looked up at the glowing text, then back down at the crowd. The names were spreading faster now, leaking into the air like ink in water. Look at them, Ivan. They are not panicking because they are lost. They are waking up. Below, a shout rang out, clear and sharp above the din. That is my father's name. He worked in the mines for House Ash. He died for nothing. Ivan flinched as if struck. He looked down at the speaker, his eyes narrowing into slits. Then he looked at Marek. You used him. You dragged his grief into this arena to win a game you do not understand. His voice was calm, devoid of triumph. It was merely a statement of fact, heavy and undeniable. I simply refuse to hide it any longer. The law of blood does not create debt. It only reveals what was always there. Seraphine turned her head slightly, just enough to look at Marek from the corner of her eye.
They are going to riot, Vale. If you let this continue, the granaries will be torn apart before nightfall. Let them.
He didn't blink.
The granaries were always empty anyway. They just didn't know it until now.
Ivan laughed. It was a harsh, brittle sound that echoed in the sudden quiet of the dais. You are insane. You truly believe you can rebuild this kingdom on the bones of your enemies? You will rule over a graveyard. I am clearing the land. He looked directly at Ivan. You want to bet on the stability of the crown, Ivan? Go ahead. Bet your name. Bet your mother's name. Bet everything you claim to love. But do not tell me what is safe. truth is dangerous. Safety is a lie. Ivan's face went rigid, his mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, he looked like a child caught in the act of theft. Then his expression hardened into something cold and final.
You have no right to touch her. Who?
Her hand moving instinctively toward her sword again. Ivan did not answer. He simply stared at Marek with a hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air between them. Then, slowly, Ivan reached into his coat. His fingers closed around something small and metallic. A seal. A signet ring of house ash, engraved with the family crest.
If you walk out of here,
His voice low and steady now.
know that every house in this room has just seen their own ledgers exposed by association. We are not your enemies anymore, Vale. We are your co-conspirators, and we will burn the city down before we let you rewrite it.
Marek watched him hold the ring. He saw the tremor in Ivan's hand, the genuine fear beneath the threat.
Then do not let me walk out.
Ivan looked at the ring. Then he looked at the crowd. The names were everywhere now, drifting like snow. He made a choice. With a violent motion, he crushed the signet ring in his fist. Blood dripped between his fingers.
I am not going anywhere.
She did not look down. Her eyes remained fixed on Ivan, who stood trembling, his hand bleeding from the crushed silver band. The silence in the hall was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of 7,000 names that had just stopped being secrets and started being weapons.
The ring is broken.
He did not raise his voice. He let the rusted axe rest against his shoulder, the weight of it familiar and grounding. That is your answer to my question, Ivan. You are not coming with me because you cannot choose a side. You are standing here because you have nowhere else to go. Ivan wiped his palm on his coat, smearing blood across the fine silk. He looked at the dais, then at the other nobles who had retreated into the shadows of the pillars.
They know.
His voice was dry, stripped of its theatrical resonance.
My father's name is on the list. My sister's dowry is marked as stolen. You have taken my family apart in front of a mob.
I only held up the mirror. Seraphine stepped forward, her sword tip touching the ground. The metal scraped against stone, a harsh sound that made half the room flinch. Captain, one of the Vane guards whispered, reaching for his hilt. Dust rained down on his head. Stand down, she said. She did not look at the guard. She looked at Marek. They are right about one thing. This isn't justice. It's a fire. And you're holding the match. Marek turned to her, the glow of the debt text reflected in his dark eyes, making them look like pools of liquid iron. Justice is a luxury for times when there is food on the table and roofs over heads. This is survival. Do you want to survive, Seraphine? Or do you want to be right? She released the guard and stepped closer to Marek, ignoring the gasps of the other magistrates. If you keep this display up, the granaries in the lower ward will be looted by noon. If they are looted, the riots start in the afternoon. If the riots start, the palace burns tonight. Do you want that on your conscience? The death toll of a riot is not measured in names on a list. It's measured in bodies in the street. Marek looked up at the floating text. The numbers were shifting now, the debts calculating interest, accumulating penalties for every second they remained visible. The palace was already burning, he said softly.
I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the arsonists. You are playing a game with pieces you don't understand.
He moved toward the edge of the dais, his steps slow, deliberate.
You think exposing the debt fixes the poverty? You think killing one chancellor returns the grain? You are a surgeon trying to cure an amputation with a bandage.
I am not fixing anything.
He lowered the axe until the head rested on the stone between his feet.
I am changing the rules of who gets to bleed.
A short, sharp bark of disbelief.
Charming. Truly. And what happens now? Do you announce yourself king? Or do you simply vanish into the chaos you've created, leaving Vare to eat itself?
No.
He looked at the crowd below. The shouting had changed. It was no longer just confusion or rage, it was coordination. People were pointing. They were linking arms. They were moving toward the granary gates with a purpose that terrified Seraphine more than their anger ever could.
I am staying. Stay where?
Her voice low.
On this dais? The crowd is climbing the stairs.
Marek nodded slowly. He had seen them coming. A tide of black-cloaked figures. their faces obscured by hoods and masks, moving with a speed that defied the panic above them. They were not rioters, they were enforcers. And they were here for the executioner.
Let them climb.
He did not move.
If I run, I prove Ivan right. If I stay, I prove them wrong.
She looked at the heir to House Ash. Order your men to hold the stairs. If those enforcers reach this platform, the city is lost before the riot even starts. Ivan stared at her. For a moment, his face was blank, uncomprehending. Then recognition flickered in his eyes. He understood what she was doing. She was giving him a chance to save himself by saving the structure that protected him. It was a test, and he failed it before he even spoke.
My men are loyal to House Ash, not to your panic. Then they will die for nothing.
Seraphine said. She turned back to Marek.
Vale, step down. Now, the tribunal is adjourned. You have won the argument. Lose the war.
Marek looked at Ivan, who was now watching him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Then he looked at Seraphine, who stood ready to